From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
A look at what's left behind.
Yo no creo que haya zafrado.
I don't think there's going to be a harvest.
The impact of Hurricane Ian on Cuba's most famous ag industry. Good news for U.S. meat exports.
Demand continues to be extremely resilient.
But not so good news for other U.S. ag destined to go overseas.
Exports have slowed tremendously.
The possible headwinds ahead right now on AgDay. Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. There's now hard evidence that low water levels on the Mississippi River are now delaying ag exports. And it comes at the same time the U.S. is also releasing some other disturbing export news. AgDay's Michelle Rook joins us with a closer look at the numbers.
Clinton data just released from USDA's Foreign Ag Service is showing while the U.S. is expected to have record agricultural exports for this marketing year, the industry is still posting a trade deficit. Throw on top of that current headwinds like the low water levels on the Mississippi River, and there's growing concern about the slowdown in exports and what it could mean for farmers. U.S. agriculture has posted a positive trade balance nearly every year for the last 30 years, but 2022 is shaping up to be one of the few where the U.S. sees a trade deficit.
So trade data through August shows that we've exported $130 billion worth of agricultural products. Our imports, however, again, through August have totaled $133 billion. So that puts us at a trade deficit of nearly $3 billion.
Newton says it's tied to a number of factors that are making the U.S. less competitive globally, including 20-year highs in the dollar.
Corn prices were historically high, wheat prices historically high, soybeans, you name it. Most of our commodity prices are at the levels we haven't seen in a number of years. And that does make it difficult to export when you have a very, very strong dollar. Like we have today.
The newest headwind is historically low water levels on the Mississippi River, which have doubled barge freight rates and slowed barge traffic.
They cannot get a lot of barges through. If they can get the barges through, they've got to be a lot lighter than normal. You're hearing force majeure, which means they're essentially walking away from contracts on an act of God clause. And if you can't get that grain out of the Gulf, it tends to kind of back it up into the countryside.
And the evidence of that came in the latest weekly grain exports.
Exports have slowed tremendously. Corn exports, for example, in the data recently released in the export sales report, shows corn exports are at the second lowest level at this point of the year over the last 30 years. So it is having an impact.
This is also the peak season for soybean exports, which were the worst since 2011-12.
Last year, this was when 42% of shipments to China between October and December were shipped from the Gulf. So it'll be interesting to see if stuff really does lack there, if China will start canceling some shipments or be looking elsewhere.
And this is a huge concern at harvest and with the global supply issues tied to weather and the war in the Black Sea. Newton says rice exports were also the lowest in 2 decades and wheat sales were the worst since 2015. And unfortunately, export headwinds like a weaker dollar or improved water levels on the Mississippi River don't look like they'll improve anytime soon.
All right, thanks, Michelle. The news is better when it comes to U.S. meat exports. The U.S. Meat Export Federation says August exports of U.S. pork topped year-ago totals for the first time this year. Through August, pork exports were 15% below last year. Beef exports were slightly above last August volume. They also topped $1 billion in value again for the month. For the first 8 months of the year, beef exports increased 5%. President and CEO Dan Halstrom says the numbers are good news considering the fact supply chain issues remain as well as labor challenges facing key markets for U.S. beef.
We have some significant headwinds and they've been building for some time. Probably first and foremost is a strong U.S. dollar against some key currencies, the Japanese yen, the Korean won, even against the Chinese currency. Interestingly enough, the one market where it's been relatively not impacted is Mexico. The Mexican peso is pretty steady and hasn't seen a big devaluation, which is good news because we're seeing some very large volumes going there.
August pork exports were once again led by Mexico, where this year's shipments remain on a record pace. And despite China's ongoing travel restrictions and periodic lockdowns, demand for U.S. beef continues to grow there. August exports to China, Hong Kong were up 20% from a year ago. Changes are on the way this week when it comes to the jet stream. Meteorologist Matt Yurosavik breaks it all down.
Yeah, that's right, Clinton. We're going to be dealing with kind of a battle of the seasons again this week. We've got cooler air to the north, at least starting the week. Warmer air back across the Gulf Coast and in the west. We're going to be really seeing a big ridge back there. If you look at the jet stream, you're really going to see how this starts to move. Some cooler air again starting to move on in. Northern Plains, upper Midwest, heading into the middle part of the week. We could be looking at a little bit colder air than what we've dealt with just the end of this last week. But it's still going to be warm and mostly dry out in the western United States, even heading through the latter half of the week. So that's something we really need to keep an eye on there. Below normal precipitation out there in the Pacific Northwest and Northern California, Northern Nevada as well. Four Corners through the middle part of the country and up into the Great Lakes, dealing with above average rainfall for this week. Same thing with southern Florida, more of those convective showers and storms moving on in. And there's a look at that forecast for Monday. Cold front moving through the southern tip of Florida. High pressure in control for most of the country, staying warm to the south, a little bit cooler for the northern tier, and mild along the east coast with more cooler air filtering in later in the week. And this is just a terrific photo. It was shared by Lindsay of Northeast Kansas, and she says this is not your typical mother-daughter photo. She says that's her little girl on her tractor, and she's in the combine. Grandma took the photo in order to capture the special moment, and it certainly is. I'll have more on your forecast coming up.
But long-term drought concerns also persist in the West. In California, more rural communities are running out of water. Heavy pumping is depleting groundwater supplies that aren't being refilled by rain and snowmelt. Now, it's reported more than 1,200 wells have run dry this year statewide. That's a nearly 50% increase over last year. The issue is most severe in the San Joaquin Valley, the country's most productive ag region. Farmers there rely more on groundwater because they don't get as much from the state's depleted reservoirs. The Department of Labor is announcing a final rule that makes major changes to H-2A regulations. The rule requires housing for H-2A workers meet federal standards and says employers must provide workers with meals that meet nutritional standards in a timely and sanitary manner. The rule also updates the process for employers to apply for the H-2A program, including making electronic filing mandatory and changing the way it calculates bonds businesses must pay to make sure they comply with regulations and that workers are paid properly. Grains and livestock finished the week mostly mixed while the stock market takes a plunge. We'll get a preview of what to expect this week coming up next in analysis. And later, the recovery from Hurricane Ian is going to take time. We'll check on the impact to the farms in its path in the country.
AgDay is brought to you by Farm Shop MFG. Did you know that 20% of stored corn is often overventilated by 3 points of moisture? On 100,000 bushels, that's a whole semi-load. Stop this problem for less with the End Zone for Corn from Farm Shop MFG. Specially priced at $1,800 per unit while supplies last.
A new USDA report is highlighting the big changes in hog production that have occurred over the past 20 years, and it's demonstrated in this one chart from the Economic Research Service. Now, it shows the average U.S. hog farm has become larger, more specialized, and focused on contract production. The darker pink shows specialization, lighter pink is for contracts, and the orange line is head per farm. Now, looking closer, hog and pig producers sold more than 9 times the volume of hogs per farm in 2015 than they did in 1992, ending at over 8,000 head of hogs per farm in 2015. And by the end of that year, the majority of hogs and pigs were being produced on specialized operations. And from 1992 to 2015, you can see production contract use increase from just 3% to more than half of operations by 2015. Soybeans joined gains in corn and wheat to end last week as crude oil extended a rally to its highest level in over 3 weeks. Michelle Rook is back with this morning's market report.
Joining us with market analysis, Randy Martinson with Martinson Ag. We ended the week last week with livestock mostly lower, the grains to the plus side. The push in the grains, how much of that was higher crude oil versus just some end of the week type short covering?
I think quite a bit of it was. I mean, it seems like the grain markets seem to be following what's going on in the outside markets a lot more than this week than what we've been seeing. Kind of adverse reactions. When the dollar was shooting higher, we were seeing the grain slip a little bit. But, and when the stock market or when the crude oil could have some strength, that helped us. Bean oil had a good performance, but harvest pressure seems to be kind of taking a back seat right now.
Yeah, we're kind of in this tug of war between supply and demand and uncertainty in the market. And so corn and soybeans essentially continue to be kind of range bound, don't they?
They do, and they're in a fairly tight range too, especially for soybeans. I think, we're trading in about $1 range. So the corn market a little bit less than that. But until we get some major news to help break us out of this, we've been seeing harvest progress a little lighter than expected. That's kind of keeping some support in the market. And I think also, the market is awful worried about what could possibly happen with a little bit of increased tensions over in the Black Sea region.
We're also continuing to trade weather globally, aren't we?
We are. In Brazil, the rain has been good, but it's getting to be a little too much. It's slowing down planting. The dry conditions in Argentina and forecasts for the next 2 weeks to remain dry is slowing down planting, and it could lead to more abandonment of wheat acres, more abandonment of corn, and a little more soybean acres.
Yeah. And we're going to gear up now for the WASDE report coming up Wednesday, aren't we?
We are, and we kind of got a hint on what the report's going to tell us. So, with the small grain summary and with the quarterly grain stocks report at the end of September. So we have a hint of what could happen, but it is USDA, and it just depends on how much of a cut they want to make in production and or yield.
Yeah, so it could be bullish corn and wheat, maybe a little bearish soybeans, you think?
That's how I would lean in this one. That's kind of the hint that we're getting, is that we will see an increase in stocks for soybeans, a little lower for corn and soybean, or corn and wheat.
And we'll see what we get on Wednesday. Thanks so much, Randy Martinson with Martinson Ag. More Ag Day coming up.
Meteorologist Matt Yurosavik joining us here, starting with the root zone moisture map, and it looks like some of the places that are kind of dry through the middle of the country could see some rain.
Yeah, and that may slow down harvest if it's already underway in parts of the country, but it may not be all that heavy until the latter half of the week. We'll be talking about a cold front working on through and then more cool air moving in. And you can still see the extremely dry conditions all the way from the Dakotas down through parts of Texas and really the center part of the country. It's been extremely dry now for the past couple of weeks, and that again is factoring into some lower river levels there along the Mississippi, which could slow down the shipping if it gets a little bit lower than it is now. So something to definitely keep an eye on there. But in the east, still looking at a little bit of moisture there. We may even see some more of that factored into the upcoming week's root zone as we head through this week because of the remnants of what was Ian, and that really factored into some of this. Not all of it was factored in here. We've still got some of that rain that may be showing up on this coming week's drought monitor here that could get rid of some of that there. And then through the middle of the country, maybe looking at a little bit of rain, but it doesn't look like it might be a whole lot to really get rid of any of those major areas of drought. Kansas down to Nebraska and up to Nebraska down to Oklahoma, still dealing with extreme to exceptional drought conditions. Even though we are going to be looking at still above normal precipitation through the middle of the country, below normal in the Pacific Northwest, and just near normal along the east. Not a whole lot until the end of the week, but look at the temperatures, big swings. Above normal in the West Coast, then we've got the Rockies below normal, then we've got some warmth out ahead of a front which eventually is going to bring some cooler air towards the north again, the Great Lakes into the northeast, but then below normal conditions there along the East Coast. And if you look at this jet stream, you're really going to notice that we've got this another cool batch of air kind of coming into the upper Midwest and Great Lakes. More warmth really surging to the north over the West Coast, and we're going to continue to track that as we head through this week. That's a look around the country. Now let's take a look at the weather where you live. Clayton Lake, Maine, mostly sunny and cool, a high near 49 degrees. Heading to Amarillo, Texas, a chance for showers, a high of 72 degrees. And Bakersfield, California, sunny and warm, a high near 89.
The ag equipment market is red hot, and it's not just tractors and combines. Machinery Pete is next, and later we'll take a closer look at the ag impacts following Hurricane Ian, including an iconic farm in Cuba, in the country. Machinery Pete talks a lot about the red-hot used tractor market, but the real story in the market right now might be another workhorse on the farm, the trailer.
Well, folks, there's probably no better example of what's been happening in the used market the last year and a half or so than trailers. I mean, if you wanted to get a new trailer, good luck. You know, the supply chain mess, probably is just none available. Manufacturers can't get one to you, even though you have the checkbook out. And on the used side of things, dealers just pinched inventory. They don't have them. So when a good trailer shows up at auction, we've been seeing prices rise like crazy. Now let's talk specifics, and let's just stay with one great manufacturer. Let's go with Wilson. So if we talk grain trailers, now before 2019, I'd only ever seen 13 Wilson grain trailers sold 40K or more at auction in the US. Now just the past 21 months, I've seen 35 Wilson grain trailers go 40K or more at auction, including 4 over $50,000. And here's a picture of one of them, a 2014 Wilson 41 foot that sold on an April 8th, 2022 online farm auction in Urbana, Illinois by our friends at Sullivan Auctioneers. Went for $51,500. So again, folks, that's 8 years old, $51,500, just amazing. But it's not just grain trailers that have been shooting higher in value, also livestock trailers. And again, let's stay with Wilson, and actually, let's stay with Sullivan Auctioneers. So earlier this year, on a mid-February online farm auction out of Forest, Illinois, this 2017 Wilson 53-foot livestock trailer went for $80,000, had people talking all over the place. Again, 5 years old, $80,000, again, just amazing. But more recently, I've been seeing rising values on older good condition livestock trailers, such as this 2003 Wilson 24-foot that went for $21,000 on an October 1st farm auction in Valentine, Nebraska.
Coming up, touring the damage caused by Hurricane Ian, what the storm did to Cuba's renowned tobacco farms. Next. We're learning more about the ag operations impacted by Hurricane Ian in Florida. Mosaic mines phosphate and potash, turning them into fertilizer. It's headquartered in Tampa. It reports its facilities experienced modest damage from flooding and high winds. Early assessments are leading the company to announce its phosphate production could be down by up to 250,000 tons through the fourth quarter. Mosaic says it expects the repairs to its facilities will be finished in 1 to 2 weeks. But what about the state's prized citrus industry? The Packer reports damage was heaviest to citrus in southwest Florida. Wind shook trees and caused fruit to drop. One expert in the area says fruit loss varies from 40 to 70% in impacted counties. Before hitting Florida, Hurricane Ian tore through an important area of Cuba, where the country grows tobacco for its iconic Cuban cigars. Patrick Upman shows us what's left of the area.
The further west you go from Havana, the worse the damage gets. Hurricane Ian plowed into rural Pinar del Rio province as a Category 3 storm. Days later, people carry their rain-soaked mattresses to dry in the sun. Pieces of someone's roof still hangs from a tree. Here we've lost everything, he says. All the infrastructure to produce tobacco has been destroyed. There's no house to dry the tobacco or the warehouse. Nothing. There's nothing left. Hurricanes are part of life in Cuba, but residents here say Ian developed so quickly they did not have time to prepare. Roshi's just telling me that his grandfather, Alejandro, one of the most famous tobacco growers in Cuban history, built this tobacco curing house in 1944. It survived every hurricane up until now. Ian knocked out Cuba's already weakened electrical grid, the first time a storm has taken down power for the entire island. Getting the lights back on in hard-hit Pinar del Rio could take weeks or months, officials say. This is the region where much of the tobacco that is rolled into Cuba's famed cigars is grown. Roshi says usually he would be planning now for the upcoming harvest. Plans wrecked by Ian.
Yo no creo que haya zafrado.
I don't think there's going to be a harvest, he says. It's unfortunate, but it's going to take months to clean this up and months to rebuild. As a fifth-generation tobacco grower, Hiroshi says he has no choice but to start from scratch. But many here who have been knocked down by the storm may never get back up. Patrick Ottman, CNN, Pinar del Rio Province, Cuba.
All right, thanks, Patrick. And that's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in. From all of us here at AgDay, I'm Clinton Davis. Have a great day.